The castle law means that if you are in your car or in your house, uh, you can defend yourself from an intruder using deadly force if you have to. Canada needs such a law.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Radical Center podcast. Great reaction across all social media this week. The comments and the likes and the viewership on the shorts was absolutely amazing. So please remember to like, share, and subscribe and leave a rating so that the algorithm will pick it up. Well, Ian, we're back today. Another week. We started off Monday with President Trump meeting with Zelensky and European leaders in Washington. We'll talk about how Canada was notably absent. And we're also going to talk about Mark Carney today announcing that he's dropping retaliatory tariffs. We got the Carney government stepping in, returning Air Canada strike workers back to work. Pierre Poilievre winning his by-election, and an Ontario man that was charged with assaulting a home intruder with a knife. So that has gone viral, and it's gathered a reaction from people like Doug Ford, Danielle Smith. So we'll get into that. But how are you today, Ian?
Feeling good, ready to go.
Ready to go? Fired up and ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get right into it. So we're going to talk about first, right off the top, we're going to talk about the fact that the Ukraine and Russia conflict obviously appears to be entering a new phase. I think we're getting close, or we're getting the framework of a peace deal. This past week, we saw new high-stakes diplomatic meetings, starting with President Trump and President Putin in Alaska, followed by Trump meeting with President Zelensky and European leaders in DC. I heard that that was the most leaders at the White House all in once at the same time, first time in history. When we went off the air on last Friday, they were just beginning their press conference, the President Trump and Vladimir Putin. So now we're learning a little bit more about what was on the table in Alaska. Potential land swaps, security guarantees for Ukraine outside of NATO membership. And I think that we're just entering a new phase. Ian, what's your initial take on this? Are we on the verge of a breakthrough, or is this just another round of peace talks?
We might be on the verge of a breakthrough. And it depends, in my view, on how the Europeans react. Because the European leaders have been the ones that have been pushing the war since Trump got elected. Now, Biden kind of trapped them because Biden was there supporting them in this effort, what we call the project in Ukraine. And with the change in government, I think the European leaders were not expecting a change in attitude. They thought that the money would keep coming from the United States as a necessary backup for them to be belligerent. Without the U.S. support and a lot of money that's gone into Ukraine in the last 5 years, or 3 years rather, there would be no war. The Europeans don't have the money that the U.S. has poured into it. Now, as for what's happened this week, my view is that this meeting with Trump and Putin was a historic event. It's the first time in 7 years that the high-level leaders of both countries have met. There's been a deep freeze in relations with Russia, and what Trump is trying to change the temperature, because he's always wanted, since he got elected, and even during the election, he wanted to renew relationships with Russia, and he said that over and over again. So there's no surprise there, but this is a major step in doing so. And then after the meeting, Zelensky insisted on coming to Washington, and Zelensky brought all of these other guys from Europe to back him up. And, the U.S. is playing it the other way, that Trump demanded they append. No, I think they came as backup for Zelensky, who wanted more money to keep the war going. And
I think
yeah.
I think the truth lies, as everything with Donald Trump, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, because he's going to declare victory no matter what. And the other thing is too, I think I was just struck by the tone and the tenor of, what happened. I think it was back in February, the first time Zelensky came.
Mm-hmm.
That really pissed off the Americans. The fact that Zelensky, however you feel about it, Zelensky either stood up or he was disrespectful or whatever. I was just struck by the tone. And the
Mm-hmm.
tone of it was basically from everybody is, look, we need the United States. Without the United States, number one, Ukraine would lose the war. Number two, without the United States and their change in policy, then we wouldn't be on the path to peace. And I think that, Trump is his motives are to put his country first, and he wants to stop spending all that money to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks that he has, especially in his first term, with Russia becoming a big part of the collusion or whatever you want to call it. I think he now sees an opportunity to come in, and he's been tough on both, as we discussed last week. He's been tough on both. He will chastise Zelensky, and he will chastise Vladimir Putin. But look, I'm not ashamed to be a Canadian, but I was ashamed of my country this week because we were not there.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about Canada's typical role in settling these types of disputes around the world. And what we would do is, especially when the Americans would F something up, Canada would come in and act as the neutral arbiter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that's kind of changed. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that? What's Canada's role in all this? We weren't even at the meeting.
Well, we could go back to previous prime ministers who, behind the scenes and sometimes openly, have played a significant role in being kind of the broker of disputes on behalf of the United States, testing the waters, let's say. Pearson did it, and we know that Chrétien did it. We know that a number of prime ministers have done that over the years. Carney has created so much animosity with Trump in his short time as prime minister that Trump doesn't respect him whatsoever. The latest one just before these meetings was that he sent two of his ministers over to Sweden to try and negotiate a deal to buy their jet fighters and cancel a $27 billion contract that we signed with the United States to buy F-5s over the next number of years.
Which are some of the most advanced fighters on the face of this planet.
Yes, and they're used in Europe, they're used in Australia. And, when we do joint exercises with our partners, you can't do it with different airplanes. They are, the Swedish ones are good, but they're not as maneuverable, not as sophisticated as the latest U.S. fighter jets. There's no rationale other than he wants to stick it to Trump to start shopping around for a lesser aircraft that won't even fit our needs. If we do NORAD exercises with the United States, our planes are not qualified to keep up with the American planes. It's just playing politics. And this comes after he and his European friends, Macron and the UK Prime Minister, said that they were going to recognize Palestine in some sort of government. Well, there is no government. They have, in the West Bank, they have a guy who hasn't had elections for 24 years, but wants to recognize them. And this at a time when we know from the beginning of Trump's term that he had changed U.S. position on Israel and Palestine. Yes, the previous presidents were all in favor of a two-state solution. So were our Canadian prime ministers, all of them. And so, in a way, Carney just reinforced what was already our position. However,
and the other thing that they did too was they tried to go to Mexico and tried to get a trade deal with them.
Exactly.
So
thumbing your nose at Trump.
Right. And I've said this many times on this podcast, speaking with Noka, is that nobody's coming to our rescue. Because the reality is, the prime minister just admitted today, which we're going to talk about, is that the United States has the world's largest economy. And and I get it, when you're dealing with Donald Trump, you're not going to get everything that you want. So again, I just think that there's a number of things that he's done in the last few months that maybe the Canadian people support just to give the thumb to Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, we're now one of the last countries to get a trade deal with the United States. And you know what they say when it comes to a deal, when you're making a business deal, if you're one of the last, you're probably going to get one of the worst, right?
We should have been one of the first.
It should have been, instead of Keir,
yeah,
right, instead of Starmer agreeing to a trade deal on Canadian soil with the United States president, that should have been Mark Carney, especially because the president was only here for 1 or 2 days, right?
It should have been Canada. And the fact that Carney wanted to keep this elbows up BS going, there has to be political reason for it. And I think we'll get into that later.
Yeah. I think we're going to talk about the Air Canada strike. That was next on the list, but let's talk about Mark Carney today. This was, I mean, it's kind of funny because it was weird. He did a press conference on a Friday afternoon in the middle of August where nobody was paying attention. I followed this stuff pretty closely, and even I didn't know that this was going on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the video of Mark Carney, and we're going to react in real time to what he said about him dropping the retaliatory tariffs on the United States.
Mr. Carney, thank you for taking our questions. Your critics are going to say that this is an elbows down approach, that you're backing Trump. What are you gaining by dropping these tariffs?
So the first thing to say is, let's be clear. We have the best deal of anyone in the world right now.
That's not what you told us during the election.
Lowest tariff rate on average, a little over 5.5% versus that 16% average for the world, and in many cases much higher. We have that confirmed, an executive order of the president a few weeks ago. It's important that we preserve that. Well, we focus on two things: the strategic sectors, steel, aluminum, autos, lumber, and we focus on the upcoming review and likely changes too. So we are matching something the Americans have done first. And it's very significant, it's unique, we get the benefit. The second thing is, and I'll take your analogy, and I have played some hockey over the years. In a big game, and this is a big game. When you go hard in the corners, you elbows up. The time game, you drop the gloves in the first period and you send a message. And we've done that pretty uniquely in the world. We happen to have the best deal with the Americans right now.
Yeah.
But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want a stick handle, you want to pass, you want to put the puck in the net.
More hockey
We're
references.
moving later into the game.
He's a good stick handler.
Okay, so just heard our reaction to that, obviously. An interesting video. Basically, long story short, he's dropping the retaliatory tariffs, that the little ones that we have had on the United States. Some of them, I think, were Trudeau era or whatever. But yeah, so Ian, what's your response to that interesting press conference?
Well, I don't think he's going to win the Stanley Cup. In fact, I'd cut him from my team, one of the first cuts. He's not a good stick handler. Anyway, 85% to 90% of our trade is covered under the Canada, U.S., Mexico agreement already. And Trump said months ago that everything that was under that agreement was okay, was going to remain. He was not going to abrogate that. He did say he wants to renegotiate it and parts of it. And the actual renegotiations come up next year. So he's throwing that out as what he wants to do behind the scenes with Canada. But Carney's announcement was a total nothing. There was nothing there except an opportunity for him to play a little hockey again, thinking that, I'm sure Butts is behind that nonsense. It works. Everybody loves hockey in Canada, and everybody was in favor of your elbows up. 70% of Canadians still hate Donald Trump. It's a political gambit. And to do it on a Friday afternoon when most of the press gallery has gone for the weekend is trying to guarantee that what he says will get the coverage almost unimpeded.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've watched that video clip a couple of times and I listened to the full press conference, and it was just surprising to me because the press gallery, the few that were there,
Right.
were actually giving them the gears. And again, it goes back to this whole elbows up thing, right? It's just a slogan. There's no substance. And if Mark Carney, if he would have done this during the campaign and he would have said to the Canadian public, look, I understand that what Donald Trump is doing to our country is not good. But the reality is, they're our closest neighbor. They're our closest ally. And, the president has decided that he's going to reshape American policy when it comes to trade. And because America is the largest economy in the world, he's reshaping the world order when it comes to trade. And I have yet to see any country act tough and put their elbows up and come out with a better deal. The reality is, when you're the government spent, like, I think it was like $2,000 an hour on consultants trying to figure out how they're going to deal with the new American administration. You can buy The Art of the Deal, and there's a literal chapter written by Donald Trump that tells you exactly how he negotiates. Yeah. And it's really funny because exactly the way it's written is exactly the way he's dealing with our country, which is why I've been so right on trade from the very beginning. It's why I'm not this lunatic putting on a Canada Not For Sale hat or giving my fingers to the camera. So yeah, that's just the reality. Look, Donald Trump is not our only problem. And we're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre in a few minutes, but we'll talk about the conservative leader and his messaging on all of this. But at some point, we have to make a deal with the United States. There's no option. And look, you can say, let's wait for the midterms. Okay, well, if the Republicans win their redistricting battles, they're going to hold the House, they're going to hold the Senate. And JD Vance is going to be the next president. So explain to me how we get out of this other than making a deal. And I think what Mark Carney is starting to realize is that if we don't, Donald Trump is going to destroy our economy.
Well, Carney has set a course that is unsustainable. If I was still a senior advisor to the government of Canada, I would say the number one thing is don't piss off Trump. Do not. And everything that Carney has done has pissed him off. And the only thing I can think is he's doing it on purpose because he's not a stupid man. And his advisors have told him, keep attacking Trump. Don't make a deal. And maybe keep attacking him into the next election.
Right. And here's the other thing too is, we talked about it. We talked about the polling numbers last week, and we were talking about how if these poll numbers are real and this is what the internal Liberal numbers show, then Mark Carney should be calling an election soon, right? So according to Catherine Smith, president of the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses Canada, there's a rumor going around, I guess in small circles, that Mark Carney wants another election before the U.S. midterms. Does that make sense?
They're certainly testing the waters, is my view. I haven't heard it yet, but if it's circulating amongst Liberal circles, we'll start to hear more. And it sounds like a Gerald Butts strategy. Orange man bad, 70% of Canadians still don't like him. Just go after Trump, don't make a deal, and then go into the next election within a year or so, next year sometime before the U.S.-Canada deal is renegotiated. Maybe make that your issue of the next election, the ballot issue. And if you look at the history of Canadian politics, both sides have tried to create boogeymen. The Liberals have always trotted out abortion, all
the social issues.
Election. Yes, every election. And the Conservatives are not going to do anything about changing the abortion, and it's just crazy. And of course, the Conservatives on their side always talk about crime, because the Liberals are soft on crime. So those kind of themes repeat and repeat. And I think that the Liberals are just setting this orange man bad up as the target in their next election. They got nothing else. The economies, we all know, we see indications all around us that we're heading into a recession. And governments that go into recessions normally lose because the public knows before the government tells you that people are losing jobs. People just know.
Yep.
So they try to divert it. What's another issue we can come up with and still maintain government? I think you're right. I think it's the Orange Man Bad syndrome. Thank you, Gerald Butts.
One last topic on Mark Carney. Everybody knows about the Air Canada strike. Went on for a day or two, I think it was. But former NDP leader Tom Mulcair says that the return to work order they issued in regards to that Air Canada strike was the first major blunder of this government. Ian, we're going to watch Tom Mulcair and then we're going to react to that on the other side.
The union has refused to return to work as per the government's order. What do you make of this decision?
I think it's one of the very first big missteps by the Carney government. They blew this one. You have labor relations. That means that there are two sides, as in any relationship. But Minister Haidu and the Carney government have weighed in so heavily on the side of Air Canada in this one that it's galling. The union raises the issue of the appearance of conflict of interest with the person who's now in charge of the Canada Industrial Relations Board, Maryse Tremblay, that you just referenced in that lead-up. Well, how is it even possible that we're debating that? She spent her career inside Air Canada representing them as a lawyer or as outside counsel. And now she's in charge of the Labor Relations Board. By the way, I'm not taking anything away from her in terms of her skills as a lawyer. But when you have such an obvious appearance of conflict of interest, you deal with it immediately. Here you're trying to use that institution to force back to the table, go to binding arbitration, and they seem to have forgotten in the Liberal Party, they once knew, that labor rights are guaranteed under the Canadian Constitution. Mr. Carney spent the campaign, whenever he was asked about Bill 21, would you challenge Quebec's laws that are discriminatory to the Supreme Court? He had a very good answer, which is the Liberals are the party of the Charter of Rights. Well, guess what? The Charter of Rights protects labor relations. It protects the right to become a member of a union. It protects the right to negotiate and bargain collectively. And you can't take that away lightly, as the Carney government has just done. Now, it's the dead of summer. I'm not sure that Minister Haidu has a lot of experience in these things, but they've created an unbelievable mess. And by the way, sometimes it's easy to finger wag and point at the unions. I know Mark Hancock, one of the union leaders from QP who was there. This guy is experienced. He's not a hothead. He had that gesture of tearing up the order, but I think he was trying to get a message across, because Mark Hancock is not somebody who does that lightly. And I think that the Canadian Union of Public Employees has a history, a fine track record of being able to work and overcome great difficulties. Here, the government seems to have set up a brush fire on its own, and it's very difficult to imagine how they're going to be able to get out of this one. If the union is saying, there's no way you're forcing us back, there's no way you're doing this, are they going to start coming up with outrageous threats of penalties?
Okay, so there you go. Former NDP leader Thomas Mulcair. So, Ian, do you agree with Tom Mulcair?
Well, he's speaking directly to his base of NDP voters and union organizers. And yes, for those folks, this will be a slap in the face. However, for all the people that wanted to travel and had to reschedule and a lot of grief, and I think for the average public, they want this strike over, so that yes, Carney trampled on this Charter of Rights, kind of like Trudeau did, when he set the army in to kill some bouncy castles, But I think it is not the most serious mistake that Carney has made. It is for his audience. The reason I think that will hurt Carney is if he does call a quick election, he risks the NDP using this as their number one issue to get the troops in line, and they will double their seats, maybe triple their seats. If they have a new leader who is an ex-union leader, they will do even better. It's counterproductive from that point of view for Carney.
See, I've been going back and forth on this all week. I mean, I can see the perspective. Obviously, returning them to work returns stability for consumers, for air travelers. And then on the other hand, you got people not protesting. They're striking because they're not getting a fair deal. Politically, I don't think there's no benefit for a government to step in like this and force a certain sector back to work arbitrarily, because that's what it is. That's the power that they have. I do agree that, you could see that the NDP, although they don't have a leader, you could see the minivan caucus that they have on the picket line supporting Air Canada workers. And here's the thing with the election, what happened was the NDP was not a viable party to stop Pierre Poilievre from winning the election, and there were soft NDP voters, liberal, that switched over to the Liberals.
Exactly.
Because Pierre Poilievre scared them. So you could see a reality where Mark Carney calls an election, this sticks, the cost of living sticks, and they could be caught flat-footed having to talk about all the other issues do not favor them, right? Housing affordability, the cost of living, labor relations. I think Pierre Poilievre mentioned that the government actually voted against a bill to give these flight attendants, who I was surprised to learn that they don't get paid until they take off, which is like, if you just think about when you're in the airport, if you think about when you see the flight attendants go on board and, sometimes they're in there for an hour or a couple of hours getting the plane ready. That was just, and again, I'm sympathetic to them, right? So, but yeah, that's just I don't know. I think that, I don't know. That's all I could say. I don't know. For the first time, I don't have anything to say really other than that.
Well, being paid when you actually go on the job is paying them like lawyers, except lawyers are making $500 or $600 an hour.
Anyways, let's move on. Not surprising, Pierre Poilievre wins his by-election with 80% of the vote. I guess you could say Pierre's back. He didn't just win. He dominated with 80% of the vote in this by-election. I think that he turned what could have been a very messy fight into a pretty decent victory, because the ballot was long, the concerns were real, but at the end of the day, he secured a seat in the House of Commons. So, Ian, yes, the win itself and the percentage is not shocking, but is there something bigger here? Or is this just going to be a one-day headline and it's going to be in the rearview mirror?
It will be a one-day headline, and his next challenge is the biggest one. In January, the Conservative Party is having a convention in Calgary where they're going to have a vote on his leadership. And he needs to come out of that again with 2/3 to be viable. And there's a poll out this week from Angus Reid that is negative about Pierre and a number of things. But one thing in there, deep in the weeds, was that 68% of Conservatives want him to stay on. Well, if those Conservatives show up in Calgary, and a lot of them will, he's got his 2/3. But we'll see. Also in that poll, I think is important, that 54% of Canadians wanted change. But that was the non-conservatives. So in other words, look at the last election, about 40% of Canadians voted conservative. And of those, 68% want him to stay. Well, the 54% that want him out are the Liberal NDP voters who didn't want him in the first place. So the coverage of that is totally misleading. I've seen headlines, Canadians want him out. No. The people who voted against him last time want him out. And they've already got him out.
Right. I'm part of the people who voted for the Conservative Party and want him to stay on. And, we'll talk about him a little bit more in detail, but I mean, at the end of the day, he got a seat in the House of Commons, and it's going to be interesting to see this dynamic because, Pierre Poilievre rose to fame in 2022. And even before that, he was a bomb thrower. But he went viral on social media because of the way that he was as an opposition leader. And I'm interested to see.
He's going to try and change his image. And the question is, will it work, in my opinion? Because I've seen so many politicians, once their image is set, it can't be unset. I think of Ignatieff just visiting. In Ontario, I think Bonnie Crombie's image has been set. Overcoming that is if you run the first time and you don't expect to win and a number of people like you, then you can build on that. But Pierre's image in the last election, especially amongst women, was very negative. And I don't know that he can overcome that.
Right. So we got another video I'm going to play. This is of Pierre Poilievre. He's outlining his plan, of what he says to protect Canadians from extortion. But I think that the bigger message to take out of this video that we're going to watch is the tone change.
Mm-hmm.
The tone change, but the substance on, the issues that he's focused on outside of Trump, like the cost of living, crime, and immigration, and all these things. That is the same message, but the tone is different. So let's just watch a minute or two, and then I'll get your reaction on your side.
Would be laughable if it weren't so terrifying, because the people behind me today are paying the price for this insanity. And that is why conservatives are setting our priorities for the fall session. We want stronger take-home pay that buys more affordable goods.
Bring it home.
Safer communities by locking up criminals.
Stop the crime.
Secure borders with immigration that is under control and drugs and guns kept out of our country. And a self-reliant Canada that produces more of its own goods and reaches overseas markets so that we're no longer so helplessly reliant on one market. That is our priority. Stronger take-home pay, safer streets, secure borders, a self-reliant Canada. And that is what we will be fighting for in the fall.
My reaction is, who is this guy? Because I went to one of his rallies during the last election, and he was like one of those Southern preachers, screaming and, axe the tax, and with rounds of applause, etc. And of course, I guess he forgot the tax was already axed. I don't know. But anyway, it's like Jenny Byrne is gone, and she used to hand him a fistful of uppers before he spoke. His new advisors are handing him a fistful of downers, and I don't know if the people will buy the new, gentler, whoever it is.
I don't know. I mean, a funny joke. I many times talking to my father-in-law sitting at the dinner table, he's like, you know what Pierre's problem is? And I'm like, what? And he's like, he shouldn't have taken his glasses off. He needs to put his glasses back on, and he needs to stop smiling. Yeah, and he needs to stop smiling because it's forced and it's creepy.
It is. It looks.
And
forced.
my father-in-law, he's a conservative. We agree on 99.999% of everything. But it's just funny to see it's a tone shift, but he's still focusing, and talking about Donald Trump, he's still focusing on the issues that are still front and center. They are the top issues for the Canadians.
But I noticed a concentration on crime, and I've read elsewhere in other coverage that crime is going to be their main focus. And it's an easy one to focus on. Like I said earlier, if you're conservative, the Liberals don't do enough about fighting crime.
Right. So I guess, what are you looking forward now? The House of Commons is going to be back in a few weeks. I think mid-September or beginning of September, something like that. What do you think that this is the new Pierre Poilievre, or is he going to get in dirty with Mark Carney in question period?
If he's smart, this is the new Pierre Poilievre, because he's going to get equal time on the 11 o'clock news. That's what broadcasters do in Canada, between the leader of the opposition and the prime minister. He needs to do what I've talked about before, is find a groin kicker in his caucus who can be the person that gets the coverage, but is the bad guy, the bad cop. And if he's gonna make this transition to being the good cop, then he cannot revert to what he was doing before, which was terrific, to establish himself as an aggressive leader of the opposition. But Peterson did that, in Ontario. Harris did that. They always had a secondary person who would be outrageous. Ginty did that. He had our friend from downtown, Smitherman. He was the guy in the legislature who would say outrageous things about the opposition and get some coverage for that. It's a diversion tactic that smart leaders use.
Right. Well, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, if Mark Carney is going to be considering calling an election, and Pierre Poilievre, he just got a seat back in the House of Commons, it's going to be interesting to see. On that topic of crime, we're going to now move to our last topic, which I know is crime is obviously a concern of the vast majority of Canadians. What I did not realize this week is how viral and how much reaction this story was going to get. And that is that an Ontario man was charged with assaulting the person who came into his home, intruded into his home, and he used a knife to defend himself.
At 4 in the
He's
morning.
the one at 4 in the morning. And I gotta say, this is one of the things that really grinds my gears, because in Canada, defending your home or your loved one can land you in jail. It's just absolutely outrageous. The fact that our self-defense laws say you have to use proportional, in air quotes if you're listening. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if somebody breaks into my house at 3 a.m., I'm not standing there calculating the math in my head and thinking, what's
Is he going to kill me or not?
Right. Is he going to kill me or not? No, I'm thinking, and I'm a skinny guy. I need a weapon. I don't have any muscle. I can't just beat him down. I'm thinking, how do I protect my wife? And if that means if there's a baseball bat next to my bed, then I'm going to do my best to beat the living daylights out of him. But the point is, you should be able to use whatever force is necessary to stop the threat, right? And not the threat to the home intruder, the threat to your family. And reasonable people out there are saying, look, nobody's saying you need to pull out a double-barrel shotgun and blow his head off every time. But it's just unbelievable. What do you think, Ian?
Well, to me, it's a total nonpartisan issue. And I'm reminded of Francis Lankin, who was a cabinet minister with Bob Rae's government, was a former prison guard. And when somebody broke into her bedroom in the Beaches, she took a rifle and killed him. And that's what people should be able to do. Now, I don't know if she got off because she was the minister in the government at the time, but that should apply to every single Canadian. And it's a federal issue because the criminal code has to be amended. And Carney dropped the ball on this again. He said nothing. So in the vacuum, we had two premiers who said what had to be said. This is crazy. People should be able to defend themselves. And in the United States, they have a law called the Castle Law. And the Castle Law means that if you are in your car, in your trailer, in the cab of your truck, if you're a long-distance driver in your house, you can defend yourself from an intruder using deadly force if you have to. Cases like that in the United States, they never, ever charge the person who's defending himself or his family. Canada needs such a law. And we have some provisions in the criminal code that might be interpreted to allow the defender to defend himself, but it's unclear, and it's up to the Crown prosecutor in that city or that municipality to decide whether they're going to charge the person. It should not be up to the Crown prosecutor. It should be in the criminal code. You can defend yourself and your family from intruders.
I completely agree. And it's, we keep hearing of these stories. And I think, look, also too, when you're out in society, and I'm sure you have witnessed somebody running away, they look suspicious, and then you see security chasing after them. I also think that when you're out in public like that, and you see something, a crime being committed, you should be able to step in and help. If you're going to be a good Samaritan, you should be able to step in, tackle the person to the ground. But no, you can't, because the Crown prosecutor might decide that they're going to prosecute you for assaulting the criminal. It's just, it's totally, totally outrageous. And, Daniel Smith, Doug Ford, they were talking about it. And, Doug Ford got his own attitude, but Danielle Smith's attitude was pretty straightforward, right? It's like, yeah, if somebody breaks into your house, you should be able to do whatever is necessary, right? So I think that's it. I think we covered a lot of ground today. A little bit of technical difficulty with the last clip, but that's okay because the people are not going to notice it because I'm going to edit it out. But look, everybody, once again, thank you for the reaction, the likes, the following, and everything in the past, forever. We're closing. This is the 32nd episode, and we're starting to notice that the short clips on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube are doing the best. So thank you very much. Again, like, subscribe, comment, and we'll catch you next week. Take care.
Bye.